All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Break the Rules stream. Today we are sowing discourse with Jon Stokes, the founder of Ars Technica, co-founder of Ars Technica, entrepreneur working in media, in technology, in self-defense, in preparing for disaster. A lot of things that I hold really close to my heart, and I really appreciate you coming up here today to speak with us about this. And by this, I mean all of the above. And we are also joined with Catherine Brodsky, and we are joined by my main man, Giovanni Panacchietti. Mwah, bella, bella. And let us start off by talking about what exactly brought you into the world of technology to begin with. What was the inspiration? Let's just start with that, and subscribe, all new people. Welcome everybody from Clubhouse. Anyway, let's go for it.
Can you guys hear me okay? I just switched up my audio.
It's a little bit quieter than usual, so I would recommend having it a little bit closer.
Back.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll go back to the other.
No problem at all. And guys, I just want to say that we have started a Clubhouse club. I don't know what else to call it for Break the Rules. So I would recommend that you would go there right now. I'm going to be putting it in the chat for those who not have Clubhouse. Get it. Become part of this thing because we are growing something really special here. So anyway, Jon, my friend, go for it. Let us know what inspired you to go into the world of technology. Take it away.
Yeah, I guess is my audio better now?
Oh yeah.
It is, yes.
Okay, all right. I'll just stick with this. I'll just stick with the MacBook. Yeah, I got a hand-me-down Commodore like 128 from my uncle when I was probably about 9. And I started, it came with, the basic programming manual. And I started on that doing basic, writing small games. And then I figured out how to work the serial port and, all the other kind of stuff. So yeah, I got into tech, that way and was kind of there for the rise of the IBM PC and the 8086. And in undergrad, I did computer engineering, and I got to do some assembler and, all that kind of stuff. And mostly hardware. So even when I went to grad school, I did dead languages and ancient history, but I started ours on the side with some other people, and I kind of kept one foot in the world of computing and internet stuff. So I've kind of, been into tech pretty much since I was a little kid.
And I want to touch on history as well later on, but just real quick, what type of history were you studying?
So I was doing ancient, like Christianity and Second Temple Judaism, so Christian origins. And I was focused a little bit on Second Temple Jewish apocalypticism. But then I switched over into more of like, to just nerd out, I guess you would say, middle Platonic readings of Semitic creation myths. And so guys like Plutarch were reading the Egyptians and trying to read Plato back into the Egyptians. And then guys like Philo were reading Genesis and trying to read Plato back into Genesis. And so
what about Plotinus? Was Plotinus also involved in that kind of reading? Because people were recommending, based on my meditations and various things of that nature, to look into Plotinus.
Yeah, I wasn't super heavy into a lot of the Greek philosophers. Mostly it was like Plato, Aristotle, and then the Middle Platonists, so the kind of reception history of Plato. And it's been, man, 10, 15 years since I was into that. Although I'm revisiting it a little bit for my newsletter in an upcoming edition. That's going to be kind of fun. But
excellent. So getting back to the main subject at hand here, which is what exactly we are going to be facing with the advent of this new, as we were talking about in Clubhouse, the sensocracy or technocracy or whatever you want to call it. Do you perceive a big difference? The cathedral, yes. Do you perceive a big difference in how people have acted when you first got into the world of tech and the way that they are acting now? And do you see technology as affecting, this difference, if you perceive a difference in the way that people are acting?
Yeah, I kind of have this sort of weird, like, unified theory of this stuff. I mean, when I So we started Ars Technica in 1998. Somebody's mentioned the audio. I don't know if I should move closer or um,
I don't know.
but
The audio seems good to me. I didn't really
Yeah, you sound
change
great.
anything. Yeah.
okay. So we started Ars Technica in 98, and I went to Comdex that first year. That was before CES. There was Comdex. And Comdex was a PC and hardware kind of like personal computing thing. And then as microchips began to make their way into more products, Comdex gave way to CES. And CES, like, you would go one year and it's still pretty PC centric, laptops, monitors, peripherals, and then you end up with somebody's telling me to yell into the mic. I don't know.
Ignore Bruce. I'm going to get to the bottom of whether there is an audio problem or whether this is just one person. Almost unlistenable. Oh, okay. I think Bruce may be trolling us right now. So anybody but Bruce Bachtrotter, let us know. Is there something going on with the audio? Because I did not change anything whatsoever on the stream when it comes to the audio. So,
I think Bruce is trolling.
Well, I'm listening a bit on the simul on YouTube.
There we go. Benjamin Life says I can hear everything great, including the keyboard typing. So yes, Bruce, Buff, I love you, but you're confusing everybody. So shut up. Anyway, John, keep going.
Yeah. So CES grew and it expanded and it began to include cars and toasters and blenders and all manner of things. And this kind of fits with the whole Mark Andreessen's software is eating the world, thesis. And, that's generally correct. I mean, as microchips go into more things, software eats that thing. So I covered the year that software ate the voting system, which was, 2006 with that first election just previously, the Help America Vote Act had been passed. And that was when software ate voting, and we're just now seeing the repercussions of that 2016, right? So I have a corollary to the software is eating the world where that basically says in every area and every new thing that software eats, there is one question that all the fights boil down to, and that is who has root. And this is like sort of it's less abstract than it sounds. Like when software eats voting, who has root? Do the Russians have root? Does the voting machine company have root? So that's essentially the only question that all fights reduce to in every regime. Now lately it's in AI. The question of AI, as I'm trying to develop on my Substack, is who is going to have root? Is there going to be a sideband that can control and steer these large models? Are we going to tweak the data sets? Who's going to structure it? Who has that privileged access to make this work, to create, read, update, and delete? So that to me is like kind of my meta on how when software gobbles up a new like area of human experience, it changes in predictable ways. That's also why I think that the blockchain stuff is really interesting because of course nobody has root, and it's not possible to delete. You can't, and that's actually the signal quality of a root. It's not just that root can read, but root can write. Root can like update, root can delete. And on something like the blockchain, nobody is able to delete from the distributed ledger. And it costs a lot of energy and a lot of math for us to take computers back to the point where we can make something that you can't delete. But now that we're there, I think that's going to be the thing that's really important.
I think so too. When it comes to this advent of blockchain, there are a lot of people who are very ecstatic about it, but then there are others who worry that even if there are going to be these decentralized things that would enable people to have communications like we're having right now, they'll be stamped down before they have a chance to grow by a possible growing power right now, which maybe taking over people's lives, even if they're not so much aware of it. Like we were talking before about, engineers at Google and whatnot, and whether the kind of programs that they're setting up right now, along with the kind of mindset that they have when it comes to life, like if you have an interview or take a poll from people who are in college right now in areas like California and New York, from what I understand, free speech is not that much up on their list. So that is the other thing that I'm kind of worried about when it comes to how much power these tech firms will have to squash even the possibility of something like blockchain rising up, as well as working together with governments to make sure of that, and what would be a way to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I have a different, my take on it is a little more cyclical. You've heard of Sutherland's wheel of reincarnation, right? So
Yes.
The GPU just kind of moves on and off the CPU, depending on like what stage of hardware development we're at, right? It's integrated, then it goes back onto the motherboard, then it gets integrated, goes back. At least I think I'm recalling it right. The lesson that I'm drawing here, though, is that like a lot of problem solution pairs reproduce themselves at different layers of the stack and in different times and in different places. So, you get thin client versus fat client. That's not a thing that we went through just once. Like we went through it multiple times, like with the Chromebook and the web browser, and things then went back out to fat client, then they went back to thin client in certain areas. Mainframe computing, I think in machine learning, it's in a little bit of a mainframe era, because to use really large models like GPT-3 cost, I think by some estimates, $4.5 million just to train that model. And of course it costs millions every year to run it in resources. That's a mainframe. They're charging metered access to it by, in units of thousands of tokens. And there are only a few models that are that large. Before you had these big mega models in AI, you had clouds. A cloud is kind of a type of mainframe in a certain way. Like there are a few large ones and people pay on a metered way to access them. So my meta point is that like when it comes to these fights over access, over liberty, over who has root, this kind of stuff, I think the key is to just look at different problem solution pairs that cropped up in the past and try to think through how they manifest or how they could manifest in some new regime of like scale or some new temporal context.
Well, affording it could be a big
for you, but go ahead.
Well, affording certain things, I think, will be one of the harder questions to solve. Where, like I was talking before in Clubhouse, this is an advertisement for Clubhouse every time I mention it. But anyway, I was talking about how people have this assumption that the free market is going to solve it, and maybe they're right. But if you cannot afford certain things like a solid infrastructure, or even having a bank that would be able to process things for you, because now, like Geo, you could talk a little bit about this as far as how much are people denied today, who go against a certain narrative, even something as basic as banking. And here we're talking about money for servers, money to be able to support something in light of a potential technocracy that would look disfavorably towards your ideas. So Geo, take it away, brother. Let me know what you think.
What did you want me to?
I would love for you to talk about just your impression of what you're seeing right now with the censorship. That would be like a basic thing.
Well, I think like it's hard to say because like I wrote in this article, as you know, that it's the coordinated effort of tech companies and social media companies. It's not necessarily a conspiratorial framework. It's more of just the result of like using certain features of controlling algorithms of performance on those platforms. Like, for example, the recent ban wave on Twitter. I truly believe that probably was an algorithm bomb of some sorts, where if you tweeted out certain things, or if you tweeted out like articles that had the quote unquote misinformation pop up, then they got to the point now where they'll just get rid of you. But I think the coordinated effort of social media companies to work in tandem to basically unperson people from what I consider to be the public square, which is the internet, is starting to affect real world outcomes. And I think that we have to examine why that is, why it tends to be that people within tech have a similar mindset about things, and also what it means in terms of the attitudes to technology and the internet itself, because it seems that the sort of the early internet, like the memification of even using it, is gone, or it should be gone, where people say, well, it's the meme, the internet's serious business, it doesn't matter in terms of real life. But now that everyone basically is inside for some degree of time, especially with what's happening nowadays around the world, with the certain event that we can't stop hearing about, you know what I mean? Then it seems that the real is slowly being consumed by the hyper real. And now that we can no longer deny the reality that the vast majority of interactions people have are happening in online spaces. But then it's the question of to treat certain subjects as being unruly or ungovernable and then getting rid of them. They'll come back with alternative accounts, but it's never the same, right? But to sort of like, to bar whole demographics based on, sort of metrics of civility, and then using things like, machine learning algorithms to detect like who is going to be unruly. I think that is sort of like a question of what it truly means in terms of, this is not a new thing. Like there's people like McChesney who talk about like how, social media companies are like getting rid of democracy or something like that. But to me, there's something more nuanced going on. It's just, I don't know, as someone who is, I guess, at least partially skeptical of technology, I think it's kind of, it's interesting how, a lot of these like algorithms are starting to, they're starting to really even coordinate or corral behavior in certain ways. But then that's nature, I guess. I mean, of fabulation in general in the social media age. So that's, is it human nature, or is it the platforms themselves are designed in a certain way to have specific forms of engagement? So,
well, I would love to get that question or an answer to that question from Jon, and then I want to go to Indian Bronson, who is also joining us right now. Can we hear you, Indian? By the way, I just want to make sure your audio works.
Yeah, I think you can hear me. I'm just on mute.
Excellent. Okay, and then I want to talk about self-defense, and we have Brian O'Shea, SPI, military vet, private investigator. So that would be a really interesting discussion as well.
Self-defense situation, Lev.
Absolutely, yes. So anyway, let's go back to Jon.
You forgot to mention pastry chef.
Oh, that's right, pastry chef. Yummy. So let's get back to Jon right now.
That's what I'm really interested in.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. So, Jon, I'm curious what you think about whether it is human nature or whether it's the algorithm, a bit of both. And it reminds me a bit of the post that you did, which I'm also going to link. Please follow Jon's Substack, by the way. He has a wonderful Substack, and this one is called Google's Coliseum, Some Thoughts on Compression, Power, and Loss. So I'm going to link that, but let me know what you think of what Gio was talking about. Which one is it? Is it human nature? Is it coding? Is it both? Oh, you got to mute yourself.
Yeah, okay. It's yelling at me. It's interesting. I guess the way that I think about these things is that these large, anything that's sufficiently big, any tech that's sufficiently big and networked and reaches enough people, the mental model that I use is leverage, like in the financial system. Are also just leverage, like physical leverage. So a sufficiently big piece is like a sufficiently large piece of tech is like having a really long lever and being able to stand in a certain, I think as Archimedes, it's like, give me a long enough lever and a place to stand, I can move the world. And that's what a globe spanning cloud architecture, like what Google has, or what Facebook has, if you think of that as a lever, then you can imagine that a few people in a room that are making moderation decisions can move the entire globe with that lever. And that's actually true, for moderation and for behavior modification. These things are basically just tools. They're force multipliers for whoever's on the other end of the lever. And like the leverage analogy in finance, they also carry risk, with them as well. And so there's a lot of ways in which like concept of risk and control are like intertwined with these massive tech stacks. And for me personally, I am a disaggregator and a localizer. I fear the really long lever. I fear the giant pile of leverage in the financial system. I fear the leverage that a really big vertically integrated cloud stack that goes all the way from the application down to the data center and it's owned by one party. I fear that concentration of power. So I'm always somebody whose instinct is to break it up. And because we're at this point in the cycle where the really big concentrations of power are in the private sector, I find myself on the side of regulatory capitalism, of using the power of the other really big beast, the other big Leviathan, to break up some of the larger pools of power in the private sector. Now, if we were in a different point in the cycle and the government was overpowered, then I would probably be some flavor of libertarian, where I would just be like, yeah, deregulate all the things and use the power of private capital to break up government power. But I don't think we're there.
Well, we have a question from Buff. What does a disaggregatory company look like? And then we're going to go to Indian.
Sure. So I think that this problem is easier than people think it is. I think that I think there are a number of things you can do. So first off, if you just look at Google, so let's take Google. Part of the way that Google got as big as it is by accretion, is by acquiring these different companies. Like they acquired YouTube, and they acquired pretty much everybody, right? So let's just say that we're going to look at the Google YouTube relationship. To me, disaggregating those two things means that YouTube has to pay they have to pay the same rate to ship data on Google's cloud as I do if I make a YouTube competitor. That's what disaggregating that means. And because these technologies are because you've got an OSI stack, at the root of everything, and you've got various other layers of the stack, those are convenient places where you can pull things back apart. This is artificial. The system wants to centralize. The system wants to vertically integrate because you get efficiencies and economies of scale. So I'm speaking of doing something that's unnatural. That's kind of the trade-off. Like I don't have a better answer, because if you just let it run and you let it centralize and you let it become efficient, then you get this monolith that that's brittle and it breaks on its own. So there's a similar dynamic again in banking, which is my favorite analogy for everything tech. You had the wildcat banking era where you had these massive buildups of leverage and you had the banks like go bust, and then we had to come in and we had to regulate them, and we have to cap, we have certain caps on ratios, on like leverage ratios, and there were probably places in these tech companies where you could cap things artificially, but that's artificial. Like the banks want to centralize and to lever up, and so you do this unnatural thing to them to kind of rein them in, because if you don't, you just get this rolling sequence of disasters.
Well, I would say that humanity is unnatural in the certain sense where if we didn't work on ourselves, then we'd start to then we'd start to degrade over time and would only have to rely on our instincts in order to survive. At which point, what's the difference between us and the animals that walk on all fours? So I think there is kind of like pushing against this inevitability, pushing against, I don't know if you would call it entropy. But I think that there is something to human nature to always want to push against that. And I see these big tech giants and this vertical monopolies that they have as a representation of that, a representation of something that I think is a good battle to fight, that at least, give it a fighting shot. And later on at the pearly gates or whatever, when people ask, like, you had a chance to be born as a human being, what did you do with that chance? Jon Stokes will say, I did A, B, and C, and the St. Peter will be like, good, you can come in. You can come into our clubhouse. So anyway, I want to go to Indian Bronson. Indian, I'm curious curious what you
Clubhouse
think.
is like heaven for journalists, apparently.
Well, some of the journalists don't like the things that are going on in Clubhouse. Not the BTR Clubhouse, that's...
Some of us got banned by a certain journalist on Clubhouse.
Interesting. I would love to hear a little bit more about that a little bit later in the conversation, so don't forget to mention that. Anyway, Indian Bronson, take it away, my friend. What do you think about the things that we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, I mean, I had this essay that I wrote like around Christmas time of 2019, and then the pandemic sort of, like, I had things that I wanted to accomplish because of it, and then work got really, really busy. Yeah, no, I mean, so, when I think about like a lot of these decentralization and these sort of like disaggregatory industries, I see sort of two steps, and the first step is decentralization, is a kind of splintering of what was concrete and cohesive. The second step is essentially it's really actually an expansion. It's an expansion, and then there's an alignment, and then there's a new paradigm which is even larger, which is even more in control. So there's been a lot of talk about, like, well, you need to exit the West, you need to get out of the cities, you need to, but people aren't actually going to do that, right? Like, not everyone is going to turn into a homesteader who is just like stuck in a small cabin. The funny thing about human beings is that they really like one another, and so the impulse is actually to congregate again. How they choose to congregate, on what terms they choose to congregate, that's actually the more interesting part. What follows from decentralization is actually re-centralization, but re-centralization in a new way. This is, you dissolve the crystals in hot water, the hot water cools, the precipitate forms, you get solid again. This is just sort of an inevitable thing. The big opportunity for people who don't like the current regime is that it is in flux. There is a lot of energy in the system. There is this opportunity for decentralization, for dissolution. But there should be a lot more energy dedicated right now into thinking about what do you build, what comes next, right? And so the globalist class, if I can call them that, they actually do dedicate time to thinking about this, right? That's what the whole Build Back Better meme is about. They're like, well, there's this opportunity, there's this destruction of a paradigm. So we have the most money, we have the most allegiances, we have the most legitimacy. We're going to determine what people live in the future. So one of the things that I thought people should focus on is, like, build an ICANN accredited registrar, right? Like, actually control a building with, like, copper and fiber cable laid down where you have server machines that don't turn off, right? And the conservative response instead was, well, we're going to build a bad Twitter clone. We're going to call it Parler, right? And then, like, AWS is like, we're just going to turn your shit off, right? And this is the ownership of root, in the sense of, like, do you even control your own cloud compute? Because if you don't, you're gonna get fucked. So the second thing, financially, so if you're by a computer, Google field of membership pre-approved groups, NCUA, and click on the first link that shows up in Google Chrome. There are a lot of things that dissidents could be doing in the financial space in order to ensure they have financial transactions in the future that they're just not paying attention to. So, like, PayPal and Stripe, they can sort of lean on you when Visa says, hey, we don't like this guy, or actually a middle manager is like, hey, we don't like this guy, kick him off your platform. They cannot tell Bancorp Bank of Wilmington, Delaware, that they're just going to not honor the interbank lending system. They don't have the authority to do that. They're actually less than sovereign in that space. If you're a Ukrainian American, and you go to like 2nd Avenue and 9th Street in New York City, there's this large building next to this live
I know
box.
the one you're talking about.
Yeah, it says Samopomish in big letters, and Samopomish means self-reliance. And so this is the headquarters of the Self-Reliance Association of Ukrainian Americans. And if you want to get a bank account or a checking account or a savings account or a mortgage loan from the Self-Reliance Association's credit union, you actually have to document the fact that you're Ukrainian American. And if you're not Ukrainian American, they don't let you in. They'll be very polite about it, but, like, the field of membership exclusion is provided for by current law.
What if my dad has Ukrainian ancestry? Does that count, or it has to be
it has to be documented. You have to bring the proof, right? And so they control this sovereign financial institution, semi-sovereign. All sovereigns are actually semi-sovereign, but they control this sovereign financial institution where like if you show up and you're like, hey man, really need a mortgage loan, but just got laid off, but I have a young kid on the way. The loan officer at this place is going to be like, well, your last name ends in Enko and my last name ends in Enko. And then but that's actually that is the fundamental mission of the credit union, right?
It goes back to personal preference where there's a little bit of a leeway. So I'm curious, John, what do you think about Indian Bronze's proposals? Do you see any holes in these proposals?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a member of a local credit union here in Texas, and I think in general, so I'll tell you guys a little known secret is back in 2013, I had a small experimental firearms and ammunition search engine called ironsights.com. And I kind of got into that, and I got booted from multiple payment systems really quickly until I found a regional bank in Nebraska that would take me, because I was doing like a freemium model for it. And I got into this idea of just using these local banks and credit systems and stuff. But man, I still have a Chase account for like my main checking, it's hooked into my Ameritrade account, so I still do, like, for my businesses, my LLCs, I'm still using Chase, and I'm doing it like for convenience and ubiquity, because, and that's the hard piece. It's like you're basically having to ask people to give up convenience and incur a certain amount of overhead for resilience sake. And that's actually a good segue to prepping, because that's what prepping is. Prepping is like, I'm going to give away convenience. I'm going to take on extra cost and extra inconvenience for the sake of resiliency.
Are you a rice and beans prepper, or do you go further than the rice and the beans as far as something much more substantial that people can feast on for a long time? Because I'm very new to when it comes to this. I'm not sure, when you are a prepper, what are the things that you need to get first. So for all the people like me who are confused, just let us know what exactly is the first step if you want to make sure that that you got to be self-sufficient. What are like the basic first things you got to do? And new people who are watching this, subscribe right now. Subscribe. Anyway, John, go for it.
Well, I don't want to. I didn't mean to segue into prepping, so I don't want to shift off of what Indian was talking about with the financial system stuff, unless if he has another point to make.
Well, so the thing about prepping is I see all of this as a continuum. So I don't believe that there will be. So what I don't think is going to happen is so I have buried in a field in Pennsylvania, I have a steel drum that I sealed up, and inside there are antibiotics. There are like 2 things of emergency rations. And then there is a rifle that is soaked in cosmoline and wrapped in plastic wrap. And there are 1,000 rounds of 5.56 ammunition there, and then like a couple magazines that are loaded. But it's okay, because the spring tension actually doesn't get fucked up if you keep it loaded. It's really just the unloading and loading that messes with that. I don't think I'm ever going to need to go there and dig it up and then just but I like the option, right? And also it was like sort of a performative thing. I did it in like 2014. I was like, haha, this would be fun. But there's a continuum to that, which is also like, maybe my only credit card shouldn't be Amex, right? Like, right. Maybe I should actually have a little bit of optionality here. And on this continuum, there's convenience, I guess you could say. There's a lack of friction. And then there's impact that you can have, right? Like, you can do a lot of stuff in the world if you are not deplatformed from banking, if you are not deplatformed from the internet. If the only thing standing between you and things that you want to see is your own doership, whether it's founding a company or just like getting your message out there, employing people, you can do a lot of stuff. If the barriers are suddenly like, those guys have radios and they're looking for me and I don't have a gun, right? That's you want to be closer to the other side. The diversity of credit cards isn't going to help you so much. And so for me, it's like, I think about this in the context of I call it like heritage American nationalism, right? So Clarence Thomas, he's a heritage American. John McCain, rest in peace, Saint McCain, technically also a heritage American. Indian Bronson, whose family came here in the 1980s and who has no real relationship whatsoever to the country, maybe a little borderline, right? Maybe a little borderline.
No Mayflower there, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of being like definitively American, I have the accent. I don't eat meat. I worship Indra. It's hard to say what George Washington would make.
It's lotus flower instead of Mayflower. That's what I want to say about that.
Yeah,
Indian. I have an idea that maybe you were talking about. I wonder I could float it with everyone else. It seems to me that what you said about Parler. Well, we could talk about Parler. I mean, say what you want. I mean, here's the thing. Torba is like a total LARPer, and he's a tryhard, and he's cringe, but he's survived like more DDoS attacks than God. I don't know how, but he has some kind of weird server system. But I'm thinking of an idea of, like you mentioned about hardware systems, about having a place isolated with actual servers. I wonder if you could have like dissidents willing to create like a library of a digital library of Alexandria with servers that are not susceptible to corruption.
It goes even further than that. It goes even further than that.
Oh, and before you say how further it goes, I just want to say that we have a 10 Canadian dollar donation,
a $1
super chat.
American donation.
10 loons? 10
from
loons?
Namu Zed. From Namu Zed, and Namu Zed says, I agree with the Parler criticism, but what are your thoughts on Minds, blockchain alt social network? And we've had the CEO of Minds, Bill Ottman, on BTR as well earlier on, and we look forward to having him back soon.
Isn't Odyssey also a blockchain?
Yeah, Odyssey is. And he also writes, if you have any, has more of a libertarian vibe. So Indian and John and, Catherine and also Brian, I would love for you to comment on this as well. So let's start from Indian. Let's go to John. Then Catherine.
So, before that,
I'll finish this point.
Yeah. Go for it.
I'll finish this point quickly. So,
because the fact that they could just delete like text.
I'll finish the point quickly. Gab and your bank and all of this stuff, all of these are services. These are all products, right? So everyone is familiar with software as a service, SaaS, right? Okay, well, the thing that conservatives are finding out, that a lot of heritage America is finding out as the world sort of runs away from them, is that government is a service also. You can think of something like the ability to immigrate to the country as like the bounce rate. You can think about people who emigrate to another country as being like churn from the platform. It's a lot easier actually to subscribe to Miami. Like Miami is a subscription service, right? You're paying monthly, you're paying your rent, you're paying your municipal taxes, you're paying the groceries. It's a subscription service where it's a lot easier to just buy a new service than build your own. At some point, however, you have to build your own services, and you actually have to build your own gas. You have to build your own government as a service. Whether that shape of government is as explicit as saying, here is our new flag, if you come onto this territory, we'll shoot you, or whether it's more like, Google is actually a lot more powerful than Bulgaria, even though Bulgaria has a token military. You actually have to own your own shit and build your own governance. And that's the only way you'll be free of someone else's governance.
Very interesting. I would love to hear from John. And also, I want to talk about self-defense as well. I think it's related definitely to this conversation at hand. And that's why we also have Brian O'Shea here. So, John, let me know what you think of the conversation with what Indian was mentioning.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it comes down to how much overhead you're willing to tolerate versus going the easy route, and unfortunately, under capitalism, you get penalized for taking too much on your own balance sheet and into your own home. That registers in capitalism as waste. Maybe to you it looks like slack or resilience, but in a certain context it's waste and it puts you at a disadvantage. So yeah, I mean, I am all for a certain amount of resilience, expensive resilience. I guess I would say, I have behind me that red that you can see in the background. That is actually a 5-gallon bucket of beans, and beneath it is a thing of rice, which is down, right below it by that.
There we
the
go,
bass
rice and
guitar.
beans. I
So
knew it.
I literally have rice and beans up here, and there's more bags of it in my closet that I desperately need to put in a container before I have a mice problem and enter my house. But yeah, I keep food on hand, and I do that for kind of what we would now call flattening the curve reasons. I do it because I want to be resilient. I do it because I don't want to be running to the grocery store at the same time as everybody else. But you've got to have space, you've got to have financial resources, and it's something that you have to invest in. And there's an opportunity cost. There's an opportunity cost to carrying, beans and a pallet of Mountain House food. When I bought, what was it, $4,000 worth of freeze dried food in 2013, if I had put that money in the market, forget about Bitcoin. If I had just put it in the S&P, I would have some multiple of that now. So, whereas I still have not eaten any of the Mountain House, it's still, the pallet is still up, actually right above my head in my loft. So that's like literal opportunity cost that I'm carrying for that decision. And, frankly, for all of these decisions, it's very similar with firearms. People think, well, I'm just going to go out and buy a gun. Yeah, there's a lot that you've got to learn. It's not just about, I'm going to accidentally shoot my own foot off. That's possible. There's also different legalities, even in a state like Texas, man. I have to be careful. I have to know what I'm doing. And I have to be willing to take on a certain amount of legal risk and, potential grief, from the system to have a firearm and to carry. So that's that all of those things are, it's energy, it's attention, it's time I could put to something else.
How much money would you say you need to be prepared?
The question is, prepare for what? So I would frame it like this. I would say, the main thing that I focus on personally with preparedness is optionality. I'm always looking to increase my options. So the first thing that I did when I got into prepping was I got a bug out bag. Am I prepared for the apocalypse with a bug out bag? No, but it increases my optionality. And you can get into a decent bug out bag that's pretty well kitted out for, maybe $500-$600. And we have a lot of recommendations on our site. And here's one of the good things about the moment right now. There are a lot of areas where the CNC machining and current manufacturing processes, even stuff from China, is so good, so much better than it was even 10 years ago, that you just get like a crap ton of value for just a couple of bucks. So, my daughter has a Schrade, $35 Schrade knife in her bag. If you had given me a Schrade knife 10 years ago, I would have thrown it in the dumpster. But the one that she has in her bag is actually quite solid, and it's made in China, but the materials and the manufacturing are really good. And it's very inexpensive. So there are a lot of areas like this in prepping where the cheap option is good and everything else is just gilding the lily. And so at the prepared, one of the things that we do, we test everything, and there is nothing that we recommend on there that is the cheapie that we wouldn't use in an emergency. And that's the cool thing, is like, you don't have to spend a ton of money. So, $500-$600, you could start with the foundation of a really good bug out bag, and that's going to give you the option to grab that and jump in the car and go and have resources.
Is the idea of having all of, sorry, love, is the idea of having all of this, is it because of your belief in a potential worst case scenario, or is it more of a, like, a philosophy of, it's important to have these things so that, it's your right and you are prepared in case? Is it more like a realistic outcome that you're feeling that might happen, or, philosophical more?
I think it's a mix. I think people come to this in different ways and for different reasons. I could tell you two stories, actually. So one story is we hired an editor at the prepare.com, Kelsey Donk, who was not a prepper, but she was just really talented and smart. And so, we hired her, and she started writing for us and doing stories on supply chain. And this was this past summer. And so she had no clue about prepping, was not a prepper. And she lives in Minnesota, and she lives in Minneapolis. And you can probably guess where I'm going with this. Like that viral video of the National Guard, like going up that was like her block. Her post office burned down. And so all this happened to her, like while she's writing for us. And so she went from, I don't know anything about prepping, but this gig pays, to I have a full-blown med kit, a bug out bag, the whole 9 yards, because she was without services in lockdown in her house in the middle of, freaking Minneapolis, first world, whatever, just, instantly. With me, I'm already a prepper. I'm not a doomsday prepper. I don't have like a lot of what we would call grid down preps. Like I've got solar, I've got backup fuel on the property, but I had let myself run out of gas for the generator when the Texas storm hit. I'm here in Texas, and we just had that ice storm, and I will say that I was not prepared for the grid to go down in Texas. That was not I'm sort of prepared for it, but like it wasn't a thing. It wasn't to me a realistic threat. And I have written an article on solar flares and EMPs, and so I felt like I had a good sense of the risks involved in the grid. And so when I started getting Twitter DMs that week when everything was freezing, and people are telling me, hey, look, my brother-in-law works at the power company. He says that the Texas grid is about to collapse, the whole thing. Or, I just got a notice from my power company, the grid's about to collapse. They said, fill a tub of water. I started getting these Twitter DMs, and I knew from my previous work that the Texas is on its own interconnect, and that the whole Texas grid could go down by itself. And I also knew about the black start problem, which is that if the Texas grid were to go down, it would take weeks and weeks to turn it back on, because you've got to do all kind of load balancing and all kind of other black magic that nobody has really done live yet on a real grid. So I knew all of this, but when I started to get those messages, and when I started to hear that the Texas grid was very close to complete and total collapse, I realized, like, hey, man, I haven't put a ton of effort into long-term grid down preps, because that's not how I prep, and I don't have that in my threat model. And I'm certainly not like a fantasy prepper that fantasizes about the end of the world. I have at most maybe 5 months of food on hand, which is very substantial for a family, my size. But
Yeah.
after month 5, we're going to be as hungry as anybody else. So I have historically looked at prepping like a combination of buying insurance and having a hobby. I started out like on the insurance end of prepping, where, I was in San Francisco. I was like right in Noe Valley, and, we had earthquake preps, and we had water and food and stuff like that. And then I kind of started to scale up, and then I kind of got more into it, and it became like, okay, some people spend money on golf. Some people race little tiny go-karts. My hobby is like, I do this prepping thing, and that's the bucket that it's kind of stayed in, for the past, 10 or 15 years for me is the hobby bucket. It's like that's basically, if I've got, some spare hobby cash, like it goes into some prep or something like this.
That's a great way to look at it. I mean, I probably would have never even thought of things in that direction if it wasn't for the pandemic, but learning how badly our supply chain sometimes can be, and, the toilet paper shortages that we've all heard of, and lineups for food, like those were not things that I ever expected to experience in North America. And that here we were. However, they were luckily restored after a while, but yeah, that's really interesting. Love?
These events are like, these are exogenous events where it's like, it's like an act of God. It's like the weather is now
Black
saying,
swan.
you are not going to have electricity anymore, and that's just too bad for you, right? Deplatforming is when a group of individuals decide that you're going to experience your own personal ice storm, and they're just going to take your services away from you.
Well,
And
except you're not, you don't have the right necessarily to speak to a large amount of people on a platform. It's something that's like
but that's the problem with the framework.
That's not particularly true. You know, the people who so there's like a group of arguments that will say, well, there's no right for you to use twitter.com. If twitter.com doesn't like what you're saying, they can get rid of you. I guarantee you, if a group of African Americans were to say, our goal in life is to advance the cause of foundational Black American nationalism, Twitter is never going to touch them. And not only are they never going to touch them, if anyone in content management at trustandsafety@twitter.com said, hey, you know what? I think this violates some of our policies. We're going to start banning these accounts. There would be a lawsuit, and the courts would be like, "You're gonna pay huge."
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I guess it depends on whether you view these platforms as a public square by the virtue that they're so mass.
What I'm telling you is I don't view the distinction of public and private as meaningful or useful to an individo's life.
Well, legally, there's a distinction.
That was illegal.
Let me clarify what I mean by that. I want to clarify what I mean by that, because like there are two ways to have this conversation. One is where we delve into a deep web of ideological preferences about public and private and libertarian and capitalist, and are things justified by the free market. The other one is, okay, I want to live my life. I want to be able to do things. Do I have the material capacity to be able to do them, regardless of what the structure is or the ideology is? And I prefer the second one, which is like, I don't actually care whether or not there is a formalized legal right defined by the Constitution and existing case law that says, yes, I can do this, or no, I can't do this. I care whether or not I can do it. That to me is the more interesting conversation, because ultimately judges can come up with whatever rationalizations they want. Private companies can come up with whatever rationalizations they want. You have to determine how you can live the rest of your life based on what is materially available to you and what you've already gotten for yourself.
Well, and that's what you're saying, though, what's materially available to you. And these companies sort of have the ability to decide that, and kind of going back to the question.
And that makes them governments. That makes them governing bodies.
They're governing parties of sorts because of the nature of their...
I want to see.
Like, I guess the tech issue as well, like whether these platforms are even built upon purely free enterprise, not just technology, but also the legal framework
even
in
if
which they operate.
Even if they were, or even if they weren't, right? Like whether or not Twitter had, like if Twitter was wholly from its inception on day one a US government platform, or Twitter was entirely developed, like, you know what, not just the Twitter API, not just like the Twitter platform, if like the concept of computing and like transistors was all of the brainchild of Jack Dorsey, like, you know, it doesn't matter. What matters is that it has this function, right? Like you can download an app called Viber and you can use it as your phone, or you can rely on like public broadband and use it as your phone, but like it's the communication that matters.
I want to get to Brian. Brian, you had your hand up and you were not talking this entire time, patient as a fucking saint. So let us know what you think about this. And also, I want you to touch on the preparedness and self-defense as well.
Yeah, I wanted to have a question about preparedness.
Yeah, because John, I don't know if like, are you guys close, by the way? Brian, are you living in Texas or where are you living in right now?
Right now I'm in the Hudson Valley in New York. So we're having the kind of cold, weirdly, like Texas had. You know, we have that all the time, but I'm sorry for you guys, by the way. Sounds like you got through it okay, though, John.
Oh, John, you got to unmute yourself.
Yeah. We had a weird go of it, man. We lost water for on and off just for pipe freezing reasons, but we did not lose power, which was really fortunate. I mean, we have like a backup plan. We have a new Airstream that my wife offices out of, which is really great. And so we kept that thing warm and ready. You know, it's got propane and all that stuff. So in case we needed to retreat to it, we could have and stayed warm. But we are on some kind of weird circuit where even though there were rolling blackouts, I think we share a circuit with like a hospital or fire, you know, thing or some fire station. So
gotcha.
We had burst pipes. We have trees down everywhere on the property. We went without water. The horses were very difficult to keep watered. So it was a trip. And of course I had no internet the whole time, and I had very little mobile internet. which it was kind of great. It was kind of awesome and also kind of terrifying, to be forced offline for like a week in your house. So.
Oh God.
Well,
like I said at the time, it's like that episode of King of the Hill where there was a freak snowstorm and Hank had to go get propane out to people as a matter of life and death.
Propane.
Like literally, it's like that's what the episode was.
Absolutely. No, that was great. I'm a fan of the King of the Hill. So, Brian, let us know your perspective of what you and your family are doing, because, you've got your kids are like learning all the various arts of combat now. I don't know what's going on. Like you are taking it to the next level, my friend.
I mean, yeah, you could say that. And hello, everyone. Interesting conversation. I really don't want to go into, government types and political views, because I probably disagree with a lot of people. I'm a libertarian. As far as Twitter goes, I just did want to say that if they are a public service, they should have their special status removed, because I do ban people. My wife's she's setting a record. She got banned 4 times in the last 10 days.
I've known people who've been banned 50 times.
By the way, without saying,
shout out to Nuke Telly. Shout out to Nuke Telly.
Yes.
Been banned 50 times. So,
without saying the exact reason why, if you think that that's going to get this stream banned, if you can like snake around it in a certain way.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What was the reason? Yeah.
There's a certain thing that they want to jab into people's arms, which is I'm totally fine with, as long as everything is safe and proven to be. And so is she. But posting a peer-reviewed thing from one of the manufacturer's websites without comment got her banned. And that's just not a standard. Mm-hmm. And so my thing is that, look, it's a private platform. That's fine. But they do have that special status where you can't really sue them. And I think the minute you start censoring people without a standard process, which is, in my opinion, what we are seeing, you've gone from a public platform to a private publisher. And that's where I stand on that. But I won't go too far down that. And Indian Bronson, which is a great avatar, by the way, which was shocking when it popped up. I thought I was in the wrong chat, but then I realized I saw the gun. I was like, oh, I'm in the right chat. But the thing is, so that's how I feel about that. Look, as my stance, I fell into being a libertarian. There's no real set of rules for libertarian. It's not like Democrats where they believe in this, or Republicans where they believe in this. I think our overarching nature is leave us the fuck alone. You do your thing, I'll do mine. I might help you, but I'm not going to be mandated to. I don't need you to control my life, because my life is different than anyone's life on this platform. And so how can a bunch of people who got elected from different states know what every single person in the country needs? I mean, I think this country was built on the fact that we're, independently minded, entrepreneur type people. And it's doing, if people just follow the rules that have been established for 200 plus years, it was doing just fine. And I just think currently, especially with what we're seeing on the border and what we're seeing with a lot of things, and I look at every news stream, and I get out there, I drive across the country. I don't just get it online. November, I put in 600 miles a day, and I zigzagged all the way to Washington State. And every time I see a government try to get involved at such a granular level, especially in the United States, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, we were set up to kind of have our own governing thing and stay within certain parameters. Anyway, so that's all I'll say about that.
Well, two things. Number one, for those who don't know Brian's wife, she is Naomi Wolf, who is an American feminist, author, journalist, and former political advisor to Al Gore and Bill Clinton. And so those are...
Wait, are you trolling me right now?
No, that's...
Brian's wife is Naomi Wolf.
Yeah.
No fucking way. I'm sorry. It's really?
Yeah, really.
Oh my God.
Yes, for real.
Wow. That's crazy.
There we go. We're bringing everybody together here.
I
That
find
was
it
like
sort of
just hit me out
okay.
of nowhere. That was like, oh man. Because
Gio is very impressed, I think, with your
yeah.
taste in
Would you,
wives.
would you
I
like me to
noticed-
send you a book?
Oh yes, please.
This is the
I
one
noticed.
this is really trending right now.
I just
That's-
find it kind of interesting, Brian, that you say that you are a libertarian and kind of the idea of the values, because theoretically, you know, as a libertarian, you would sort of say, or correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be, but that, you know, Twitter or whatever the platform is, since they're a business, they can sort of decide what to do. But it seems like a lot of people, a lot of libertarians and others are sort of feeling that maybe that's not quite right in the situation of these platforms because of the impact that they have, because they're not just normal businesses. Would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who they are, and to be clear, I'm a libertarian because I don't really relate to either of the other parties. I'm very comfortable as a libertarian. I've spoke at several Students for Liberty events all over the world, and but to your point, what I was saying is. They were private. The first thing I said is they are a private company. It's like, leave them alone. But they do have a special status, legal status, that's been afforded to them by the US government. And that I don't like. I mean, first, it gives them an unfair advantage competitively. And I'm not for flattening markets or anything like that. And it's tough to be a libertarian because you can't be a pure libertarian without being a total anarchist.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I'm kind of I guess if there's such a thing, a moderate libertarian, where I do, of course, believe that you need some rules and you do need some parameters. Otherwise, we'll have chaos. But I also if it's maybe it's going to boot me out of the libertarian sector, but I do believe that, look, if you're going to have rules for one, you have rules for all. If we are accepting a government set of rules, then, you know, everyone operates under the same rules, and that's it. And I'm just, yeah.
I also want to get some thoughts from John. John, this is your stream, and I know it's 6 o'clock right now. I don't know how long you'd be able to stay, but I really appreciate you being here.
Oh.
So please, I just want to get John's opinion on what Brian was talking about, and where exactly do you see that limit of libertarianism? Because for myself, my big concern has been if the default is leave us alone, if there is such a thing as manufacturing consent, then this trend that we have seen towards this radical SJW leftism, like whatever you want to call it, this is not something that's been forced upon people. This is something that's been thread through the media, through advertising, just through the general condition that people are in. So when it comes to saying I want to leave, you know, I want people to leave me alone and that's it, I'm not sure if it's that simple. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. And this is my cat Steve, by the way. Everybody subscribe for the sake of Steve. Steve is a beautiful cat. I love Steve. Anyway, go for it, John.
Will you send us a virtual pet or her if we subscribe?
I'm a dog person, so Love, I have some issues with this, but I'll let John answer.
Well, your name's Cat, so that's weird.
I'm also a dog person, so.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
I appreciate you much more than Love.
I also went through. I'll say I went through a very brief libertarian phase, but I describe myself as a localist, which doesn't have a ton of meaning, you know, in the zeitgeist. But it's sort of a little bit libertarian in spirit, in the sense that, like, I am a breaker up of large clumps of power. You know, I like competition, and I like to see big pools of power broken up, you know, usually by other big pools of power. I would rather see them broken up intentionally than to see them do what they often do, which is to collapse and implode under their own weight. So where I part ways from libertarians is that I'm not dogmatic about whether those pools of power are in the public sector or in the private sector. And I think what we're seeing now is a kind of moment where a lot of that public sector, private sector distinction, we're fighting through this. I mean, we just had an argument, you know, with Indian about, well, no, they're governments. Well, no, they're not governments, you know. And so it's like that libertarian versus statist dichotomy, I don't think necessarily gives you the tools to think through problems of concentrations of power in a networked age. And there are a lot of ways in which that's my feeling on this. And so I am that's why I describe myself as a localist. I mean, I'm sympathetic in a lot of ways to libertarianism, but then I also am like, well, I will set the Leviathan of government against the Leviathan of, Amazon, for instance, and like let's you and him fight, and hopefully they will counterbalance each other.
But again, I would say, oh, good. Go ahead. Go. Sorry.
I just want to say real quick something that the chat was bringing up, which I should address. I am neutral on this issue just because I know that there have been really bad things throughout history when it comes to any time you would, let's say, suppress people who happen to belong to whichever group from participating in the marketplace. And, that's been done in Russia, that's been done in all over the place. So with that being said, people were bringing up freedom of association.
Good point.
And there was a very interesting book that I read called Age of Entitlement by Christopher Cadwell. I have a link to it in the chat, which talks about how after the civil rights movement of the 60s, there was this kind of like a dual constitution in place. So you had one constitution where under the First Amendment, it would guarantee freedom of association. But then you would have the competing constitution where that's not exactly the case. So like if you're a business, you cannot discriminate against people, based on race, for example, as far as who you let in. But the question that Christopher was proposing here was that what exactly does this mean down the road, as far as like he was talking about basically the powers of the courts expanding from that, having the status of people who, who is or isn't allowed to participate in that association to, now we're talking about, women, then, LGBTQ and all that. And again, I don't have a problem with that, but I think what he was bringing up, and I always bring up the example of, let's say, California, which I talked before about with you, Brian, California creating this new law where if you're a business of a certain amount of, make a certain amount of money, you have to hire a certain amount of women, I believe, or like some other underrepresented groups in like top positions, like CEO positions, which creates a potential problem when it comes to businesses that, let's say, are making that amount of money, but not a super amount of money, where they're not going to be able to fulfill that mandate. Thus, there's going to be less competition for the bigger fish out there. So that is just one scenario that I see. I'm not sure what the other ones would be. I mean, people have been talking about this whole freedom of association thing for a while. So I'm curious, John, what your opinion is, as well as everybody else's. Is this being blown out of proportion from the people that are taking a look at this simultaneous as they see it, a system of laws or simultaneous constitution? Or is there something potentially dangerous about this?
I'll let Brian jump in.
Oh, thanks, John. Well, first, I want to address, I think you sound to me a lot more like a libertarian than you think you are. We would call ourselves localists as well, based on your description. And I would also say that I do respectfully disagree with you that it doesn't give us the tools to really delve into these issues you brought up. I think it gives us the freedom mentally to delve into them because we're not locked into a certain dogma of, big government knows what's best for you versus, reduced government and, unrestricted market. We do believe in unrestricted markets, but, we're not locked into a Republican view and we're not locked into a Democratic view. And I think the nature of human beings does not allow us, we're constantly evolving. I'm a different man than I was, 6 years ago. And that's why I don't like, I like guidelines. I don't like rules. And so with that said, I think it does allow us to, especially in the age of technology, being able to be mentally nimble to the insanely fast, rapidly, evolving technologies that are controlling our life. I mean, having that ability to jump about it, and it sounds like you have that ability, and most people do. I also like being a libertarian because I think the best thing about human beings, but I'll say especially, people who live in free societies, I won't just say Americans, is the great things like the internet and Twitter and these things that have come into our lives. They came as a result of people not being mentally restricted into a certain dogma. It came from a combination of intellect, some Asperger's, and some, but a lot of creativity. And when you start locking, and I have found this just in hiring people, like I try to hire people for budgetary reasons, but also, because I get better work out of them if I put them on a contract and a project-based contract. The minute I've made people like W-2s or wage earners, the work product just goes down the toilet. And I think it's because there's this subconscious sense of this guaranteed paycheck. And what I found with that is, yeah, that might be comfortable, but if the whole world went to, let's say, a guaranteed paycheck type style, and I know I've kind of gone off course here, I think you're going to see a huge deficit in creativity, because you saw it yourself and you just described it. When you ran into huge issues with the storm, you got creative. You're talking about prepping. That takes a lot of creativity. When you're faced with any sort of hardship or challenge, your creative side comes out. And I think that's what makes humans so wonderful. And so my problem with so much increase in government management of our lives, and I have children too, and it sounds like if you don't have children, you have a lot of people you're taking care of, and anyone else on the thing. And I know what's best for my children. Some committee in Washington does not. And so, and that's when, back to Lev's point, the stuff I'm doing with my son, where I'm showing him, and I did it with my daughter as well. She's in her 20s now, but that's just stuff we did growing up, is learning how to shoot, learning how to fish, learning how to make fires, and maybe not so much learning how to throw axes, but the point is, I just feel like people should let their citizens shine and not assume they're going to screw things up. And I'm a fierce libertarian ever since it was a Brennan that grouped in libertarians with insurrectionists and domestic terrorists. And then, I can't have that. And one more final point I'll say is, I want businesses to have free markets. I want private businesses, even like Twitter, to be able to kick anyone off their platform they want, because the government should not be over-regulating businesses. They kind of have to regulate some businesses because, you don't want certain brothers blowing up entire Texas towns because they don't care about the environment. I'm trying not to get you censored, Lev. But
thank you.
The point is, what I'm seeing now, and I would recommend everyone take a look at it, and it's a tweet I pinned last night. If you look at this new HR bill, the government is using private enterprises to propagandize people to take the vaccine. And, I'm all for PSAs and saying, hey, look, we know you're worried. Here's why you should take it. Here's the cost benefit analysis. I'm fine with transparency. Totally cool. But this is a covert influence campaign that $1 billion has been assigned to. And it's laid out in plain English that they're going to get people to take this vaccine. And that's fine. Take the vaccine. I will take the vaccine. I don't want to be first in line. But once everyone's not growing a third arm and everything, I'm fine with that. I'm vaccinated. I was in the military. I had no choice. But what I don't like, and what scares me, and I think what scares a lot of people, is people are getting kicked off major social media platforms simply for questioning the safety of the vaccine.
Well,
and that's where I have a
even
problem.
Beyond that, like, for example, Alex DeLarge in the chat, do you prefer Facebook? I agree. Do you prefer Facebook being regulated? Yeah, this is why I am not a libertarian. I mean, I get what Brent is saying, but for example, I'm reading the way you met your wife was she had threats against her for reporting about human rights violations in the Middle East. Is that true?
Cyber stalking me?
Yeah, something like that. But no. But for example, she was recently banned. I remember because Naomi Wolf was brigaded by Chapo Trap House Ironist at the behest of Will Menker, who was like making fun of her action, like legitimate take, was like saying she's lost it, she's terrible, she's crazy. When Naomi was saying that the masks are going to create whole generations of kids who do not have that sort of like connection to people. And it very similar almost in some ways to Giorgio Agamben's argument about the loss of human intimacy and just the interpersonal intimacy of seeing someone's face. But then again, like, the Chapo people, they're probably taking money from some organization that, so now they have to get rid of.
You'll have to send me all this stuff because I don't know who they are.
Okay. I'll send you the tweets. But so I'm just reading up. But I think that what I wanted to talk about, maybe just to get back to the prepping thing and also the way technology plays into this. I think that it seems that the popular image of the prepper is sort of like this LARPy, like I live on a property, a compound, and I'm gonna the
Branch Davidians.
Branch Davidian type of stuff. But I don't know. I think that I forget who said this. I think it was the Canadian prepper guy, where he said like the best sort of defense against any SHTF situation is that you have a community of people who have certain skills around you. For example, if you are lucky enough to live in a farming community and your neighbors and you actually legit get along and talk with your neighbors, I think that's probably a better approach than like I have some kind of like bunker where I have I have I'm just remembering the Alex Jones commercial where it's what's the food company called, the freeze-dried food? He's like, they're not like other crummy foods. They're the eFoods Direct. Like, if you have stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think like what is the difference between that and sort of what people think of being a prepper is. So I don't know. I feel like, again, this goes to like the loss of community in general.
And then I would also be interested in circling back to that question that the chat was asking.
And also, if we could have a sewing discourse with Naomi Wolf, that would be excellent as well.
That would be really cool, definitely. And I just want to make sure that after that, we also could circle back to the freedom of association
thing.
I
think we should definitely...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go on.
I was going to say, I think we should definitely at some point, because that's why I love Break the Rules, because there's a million like topics we can go down, and at some point I definitely want to talk about why I always tag things as investigate everything, especially media. Like I've been on the inside. I used to be the guy, without going into the detail, that would start the spin, and now being on the inside of it and just watching the avalanche of idiocy just take over, fueled by a lot of bots and a lot of trolls, where like, you're in the crowded theater and you're like, no, fire is the name of the movie. Yeah. Sit down, you're trampling each other, and everyone just goes nuts. And I've been on the inside of that, but different topic, but would love to talk about that sometime, because it happens to a lot of public figures all the time, where they're like, hey, you know what? I found this, in that case, there was this watch, and I heard these guys talking about time travel, which is the name of the watch or some function. And then she got banned, and everyone's like, oh, she believes in time travel. Oh my God. It's like, no, she doesn't believe in time travel, you idiots. Like, read the links. Anyways, so.
But when it comes to prepping and having, let's say, your own, not even compound, but just like a group of people that you can trust, I think that there is this tendency in media today, and John, I'm curious what you think about this as well, of looking at anybody who wants to be, let's say, independent, self-sufficient, being like with their family, as something that does come back to this question of, distrust, like they're going to exclude people, they're just going to have like their own people there, and what exactly is the right balance here? Because again, like, this is why I go back to this whole question of First Amendment, freedom of association, stuff like that, because I think we have grown as a society, even though the media makes it look like we didn't. I think we have grown for the better when it comes to being able to accept people who are different from us, while at the same time, I think having roots to family, community, all that kind of stuff is important, and people could be judged based on whether they resonate with the community or not. In other words, like, if you want to have your own, like, independent community somewhere, like the Amish, or I don't know, like, you would want want there to be somebody who would want to be the best Amish they can be, as opposed to somebody who would do things completely differently from you. And I think that there is a tendency, and please let me know if this is the case, of people within big tech to be very questionable of that, and to instead look at people who want to be separate and just like do their own thing as being something that's going to ruin this great experiment of coexistence, multiculturalism, whatever you want to call it.
That's exactly what it is. So early on, this is what I'm saying. There's sort of two steps here. There is decentralization, and then there's this re-centralization step, right? And so, fundamentally, if you are, forget like the individual entities there. Like there's this like overmind entity called Google. There's this large institutional entity called big tech, right? There are these networks of relationships and career hierarchies and things like that produce incentives that sort of emanate a will out in the world. It looks at things like right-wing dissidents, and it sees sand in the gears. And all it's doing really is it's cleaning the sand out of the gears, right? When it comes to the gears of commerce and trade and free enterprise and all that stuff.
And the opening up of markets.
It's just economic production, right? If your position is, I don't want to have more labor in this area, you are sand in the gears, fundamentally. You are opposing the line going up. And so to it, all it's actually doing is it's preserving the system, and it's getting rid of the problem. And this is what dissidents don't understand. Like, the only way to counteract that is to be as equivalently sovereign as Google is. You can analyze this in terms of state power. And again, private-public distinction doesn't matter. If you want to live on a particular territory and someone else wants to live on a particular territory, your bodies can't physically exist in the same space, right? So if you want to prevent them from coming onto that territory, build a wall, get guns, do patrols. Like this is really what it comes down to, is who actually has power. And so to me, it's uninteresting, I think counterproductive to try and analyze all of these things in the realm of public or private, or what should we have or what shouldn't we have. How about what do you have? What will you have? This is even more fundamental than those things. Like in terms of personal protection, right? Like, so my carry gun for a very long time was a SIG 229, particularly the SAS model with the E2 grips. It's really nice. It's very slick. The thing about it, though, is it's got this big old hammer on the back. And
I was about to grab mine and wave it. I have this.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, I don't want to get booted. I don't want to get this banned. Like,
I don't know how the AI reacts.